when we come to Isaac, his character and his story don't really seem to dominate the narrative in the same way that others do. He's significant, he's there, but the big attention is first on Abraham and then on Jacob and his sons. What do we know about Isaac? A couple of things. A couple of key incidents. We've already mentioned in the last video about Abraham being commanded by God to offer him as a sacrifice, and then a substitute is placed. I really don't know how you move on in life after your dad has nearly sacrificed you, but he does. As he gets a little bit older, plans are made for Isaac to find a wife, and Abraham is insistent. God is insistent that that Isaac is not going to intermarry with the Canaanites. We're not going to see the same mistake potentially made that on some theories, as we discussed before, was made with the sons of God, possibly the descendants of Seth, intermarrying with the descendants of Cain. There is this significant issue of the curse that is on the Canaanites. And so Abraham sends one of his servants, sends Eliezer back to the family up north in Haran. And when he gets there, he comes to a well and he prays, he asks God to show him a sign to reveal who Isaac's wife will be. And this young lady, Rebecca, comes out and she shows kindness. She offers him water to drink. And Isaac marries Rebecca. Then we don't have so much more detail. There are other things that happen, but the big focus really is on what happens a little bit later, because Isaac and Rebecca have sons. They are twins. Esau, the firstborn, and Jacob, and there's a struggle, a wrestling between them right from the womb, right from birth. And these lads grow up. Jacob, the sense is that he's a homeboy. Jacob is close to Rebecca, and his focus is on the household. I don't think that means that he's in doing the dishes. I think that would mean the management of the place. That would mean the care for the domesticated flocks, that kind of thing. Whereas Esau is a hunter, and Esau is hairy. He's very furry. That's sort of like a sort of wild figure, and he's very much dad's boy. And then there's a couple of fascinating things that happen. First, Jacob tricks his brother. His brother comes in absolutely famished and starving, and Jacob's cooking up some stew, and Esau says, "That looks good. That smells good. Let me have some of that." And Jacob says, "You can if you sell me your birthright. Give me your birthright in exchange. The birthright to be effectively the firstborn son, to have the blessing and the rights that come with that." So it reminds me, I remember when I was about 5 or 6 years old, we had a school trip to Chester Zoo, and cut a long story short, going to the souvenir shop at the end, used to do that in those days on school trips, and everybody were buying these plastic crocodiles, and I buy one of them. It was my souvenir from the trip, and I'm clutching it on the coach home, and there's another kid who's got some polo mints left over, and I quite fancy some polo mints, and this I'll swap with them for sort of half a bag of polo mints for your crocodile. And being a child, having no concept of values and things, and being very focused on the now and wanting some polos, I say yes, and I eat the polos, and then the teacher finds out what's happened and says, "You need to swap that back." I can't, so I give them possibly 5p or something like that. And I get home, and my mum is neither impressed with the loss of the 5p, but also not that impressed with my choice of souvenir either. Just a little slice of, but it makes me think of that. Well, Esau gets some soup, some stew. He's happy, but he's lost to that sort of permanent, long-term benefit. There's that short-termism when you're driven by your appetites. There's a bit of there's some side application there for it, isn't there? Jacob isn't satisfied with that, and by the time comes, Isaac is advancing in years, his sight is going, and it's time for him to bless the firstborn son, to actually enact the birthright, that sense of handing on, not just here's a nice little blessing and it's prayer for you, but the handing on of God's covenant promise that has come from Abraham to him, and now will be passed on to Esau. But that's not what's meant to happen. It's not God's plan. Living within the story, you wouldn't know that. We know that from looking outside in and having the full story to benefit from. But it's not what Rebecca wants, and it's not what Jacob wants. And so Rebecca hatches a plan with Jacob, and she gets him to get animal skins to cover himself, to give the smell and the feel of Esau. And he goes into his dad is in the tent, and Dad says, "Is that you, Esau?" And Jacob says, yes, or something like that, and that doesn't sound like Esau. Come closer. And he reaches out to touch him, but it feels like him, and so he gives him the blessing. Now, when Esau finds out what's happened, he is furious, and he is after Jacob's blood. So Rebecca sends Jacob on the run. Esau craves the blessing from his dad, but cannot receive a blessing now. And that's the other significant incident that we have about Isaac, his blessing of Jacob instead of Esau. Now, the story continues now with Jacob. So Jacob flees for his life and is sent to his uncle Laban, who's part of the household of Rebecca's brother, up in Haran. On the way, he stops to rest. He finds a place to sleep. Sets a stone to rest his head against. And he has a vision in the night where God appears standing at the top of a ladder or probably a big sort of staircase, sort of one of those sort of ziggurat type buildings, and there are angels coming up and down the ladder. God blesses Jacob. God meets with Jacob to renew the covenant promise with him. Heaven and earth meet. That place becomes known as Bethel, house of God. When Jacob arrives at Haran, he finds a well. There's a well again. And at that well, one of Laban's daughters is there, Rachel. And he falls in love with her beauty. There's a big stone that covers the well, and the tradition was that the well cover was only to be removed when everybody was there to water their flock. But Jacob is not having that. Rachel's special to him, and this chivalrous act, he moves the covering stone so that her flocks can be watered. But Jacob has fallen in love. He requests for her hand in marriage. Laban agrees in return for Jacob working for 7 years for him. But at the marriage, Rachel, that's what Jacob thinks, is veiled. And it's only when they go into the bedchamber that he discovers actually he's been tricked now. The trickster's been out-tricked. And Laban has given him his older daughter, Leah. And there's something about Leah that is considered not as physically attractive. So Laban, in his challenge, says, but no, the custom is that the oldest daughter is married first. I'll tell you what, you work another 7 years for instance, it's going to be 15 years, and I'll throw Rachel in as well. And eventually, so the result is that Jacob gets both the daughters as wives. And then he works again, another 7 years for basically to earn income, if you like, to build up his own flocks and possessions so that he can be independent, so that he's got a sustainable life. And Laban keeps tricking him. You can read all about this in Genesis in terms of only wanting to give the sort of the runts and the weedy ones in the herd. But Jacob also has these sort of tricks and plans, some interesting stuff, not quite sure how it all is working, but God is working. That's the important thing, and God makes sure that Jacob is blessed. And so the time comes, and eventually Jacob decides it is, God leads Jacob to return, because he's meant to be in Canaan. That's God's promised land. And so he heads back. And then he hears that his brother Esau is coming to meet him with a large army of people. And he is concerned, but he starts to make arrangements. He starts to send parts of his household on. He's ready to meet Laban, meet Esau. But then in the night, a man comes to meet Jacob and begins to wrestle with him. And they seem to be so much that one can't overcome the other. And Jacob recognizes something that's happening here, that the angel of the Lord himself, possibly, in fact, is wrestling with him. And so he asks, will you bless me? Will you bless me again? Will you reassure me of that blessing? And the Lord says, tell me your name. And Jacob is forced to say his name, to acknowledge his identity, because names were not just like they are today, like Dave or Rich or whatever. They meant something. Actually, our names have meanings. When we don't actually think about it, these names are deliberately linked to a person's character and also the hopes and dreams of their life. And Jacob, there's at least some punnery, some wordplay, where the name has this idea of someone who's a bit tricky, a bit devious. So he's admitting that. He's saying, I'm a trickster, I'm devious. He owns his name. What does the Lord do? The Lord blesses him and gives him a new name, Israel, which means I've wrestled with God. Perhaps there an acknowledgement that that's what he has really been doing. His struggle has not been with other people, but with God, and trying to grasp things that God was ready to give. But at the point where this happens, what God has done is he has touched Jacob on the hip socket and dislocated it. And so Jacob's clinging on to him when he cries out to him for blessing. There has to come a point where we stop trying to wrestle with God and we simply cling on and ask for him to bless us in his grace. And that is where he gives us a new name, but Christ's name is written over us. So Jacob meets with his brother. They actually make their peace, but they go their separate ways. And he returns and settles. And over time, his wives have children. Actually, it starts out that Rachel is barren. She's infertile. There's a barren theme, isn't there? And she's not able to have children. And Leah has lots of children. And Rachel can't. Rachel gets one of her servants to act as a concubine. So Jacob has children to her. Leah realizes that she's running out of steam, fertility, so she gives one of her concubines, and there's more children that side. Eventually, God blesses Rachel and gives her two sons, Joseph and Benjamin. Now, Leah will die first. It's fascinating. There's a family tomb. Abraham, when he was about to, when they're getting to old age and he wants to bury Sarah, he gets a plot of land. He buys his grave. The Canaanites are willing to sort of give or lend to him land for this purpose, but he insists on buying land. It's another way of that statement of faith, buying the grave for the dead to indicate that this land will be for the living. Fascinatingly, it's Leah that is buried in the family tomb. But Rachel lives on a bit longer. And we will move soon to the story of Jacob's sons. Before we move on to the next video, I just wanted to come back to those meetings at Wells, the representative of Isaac, and then Jacob meeting Rachel. This fascinating image, this event, where important meetings happen at Wells. Later, Moses will meet his wife at a well when he's in the desert on the run, having killed an Israelite slave. Come to that another time. And there's echoes of Jacob's experience, echoes of Isaac's experience. And that's a fascinating image. Remember how we've talked about these sort of pre-echoes, these types, these images that point forward. We get to the New Testament, and Jesus is passing through Samaria, and he reaches a well, and he is resting, and the disciples go to get food, and a woman comes out in the heat of the day, an unusual time to be out. But that reflects her own story. This woman who's had 5 husbands and is currently living with a man who's not her husband. So is out there away from the public sense of this shame that might be around her. And Jesus asks her for a drink. And do you remember she says, "Why are you asking me, a Samaritan, for water?" And Jesus says, "I can give you water, not from the well, but water that springs up and gives, and is eternal, constantly refreshing, life-giving." Now, some people have been trying to be over clever around this, try to suggest that this is a description of a marriage ceremony. It's not. All sorts of reasons not to go in that direction, in that kind of way. Jesus does not marry the Samaritan woman. But certainly that imagery from the Old Testament of meeting someone for marriage at a well is relevant. That typology is moving forward, that this is that meeting point that provides the basis for union. What is the union here? Well, I think the image is pointing to the way that Christ meets sinners, the way that Christ meets with people from all nations, not just the Jews, and not as individuals, but united together as the church, that we become the bride of Christ. Thank you for watching in and listening today.